My name is Tom Harrison. I am 56 years old, retired for 2.5 years now. For 30 years before that, I worked as a software engineer at a large insurance company in Columbus, Ohio. Mary, my wife, and I lived in the same small house in a quiet suburb near Delaware County for more than 20 years. The house had a front porch, a backyard, and a pale blue shed everyone in the neighborhood called Mary's Little Temple. Mary passed away 3 months ago. Cancer. It was discovered late, spread fast, and left us with nothing but rounds of radiation that only drained her further. Mary didn't like hospitals. She wanted to come home. And that's exactly what I did. Brought her back, let her spend her final days in the bedroom that overlooked the garden where she had planted lavender every May. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't cry when I signed the death certificate or canceled her phone service. But I broke down when I opened the fridge and saw a small carton of almond milk with her name written on the lid in black marker. I don't know why something so small was what shattered me, but it did. The house was too quiet. I still cooked breakfast every morning at 7, the old habit. Fried eggs, 2 slices of toast, and black coffee. But now there was only one plate. The chair across from me sat empty. Each time I glanced right, I almost expected to see Mary holding her gardening magazine, her legs tucked under a wool blanket, her eyes peeking at me over the rim of her reading glasses. I told myself I'd be fine. I kept saying it. But time doesn't heal the way people think. It just teaches you how to live with the emptiness. Last week, I got a call from a woman named Leslie at a real estate office. She lived nearby and had once helped Mary sell some potted plants online. If you're thinking about selling the shed out back, I have clients who would be very interested, she said. The shed. That blue shed. Mary called it her little heaven. Inside were her sewing machine, baskets of yarn, jars of seeds, shelves of gardening tools, and the old rocking chair where she read every summer afternoon. I had hardly ever gone inside. It was her world. I had my garage and my tools. Mary had her shed. I wasn't sure I truly wanted to sell it. But a part of me thought maybe if I cleared it out, if I passed it on to someone else, I'd stop feeling like I was living inside a museum of a past that was already gone. So this morning, with the autumn sun breaking through the thin fog, I carried the old key, walked out to the garden, and opened the shed door. The hinges groaned in their familiar way. The scent of old wood and dried lavender hit me immediately. The air inside felt frozen since last summer. Everything was exactly as Mary had left it. The half-finished embroidered cloth is still on the table. A sealed jar of soil beside an unopened packet of seeds. A note pinned to the wall. Plant cucumbers again next week. I stood there, hands still on the door handle, afraid to step further. My heart pounded harder than I expected. Not because of the shed, but because stepping in meant facing everything Mary left behind. All the things I never cared enough to ask about, to notice, to understand. But I stepped inside, and that was where it all began. You are reading the opening of a true story, told in the voice of the man who lived it. If you are following along, tell me where in the world you are watching from. I'd love to know. It took me nearly an hour just to clear the small wooden table in the middle of the shed. Mary always kept things neat, but time and dust had lain over everything like a dull film of forgetting. I carefully gathered the spools of thread, the yarn, the scissors, and the unfinished embroidery. There was a wooden frame where Mary had been working on a pattern of wild daisies. I brushed my hand lightly over the stitches, wondering what she had planned to finish it for, or for whom. On the shelf by the window, I found a few gardening magazines, their pages yellowed, with a dry leaf pressed between them, maybe from last fall. She always loved pressing leaves into books. To preserve the feeling of a season, Mary once told me when I teased her for being too old-fashioned. I bent down under the table to move a few pots of soil when the floor gave a strange, hollow knock. I froze. Beneath the dust, one of the wooden boards was slightly out of line with the rest. Curious, I slid a putty knife into the seam and pried gently. The board lifted more easily than I expected. Beneath it was a small, rectangular space. Not large, but enough to hide a few things. Inside was an old metal box, paint peeling in patches, coated in dust and spiderwebs as thin as hair. I pulled it out carefully, placed it on the table, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. The box wasn't locked. Inside, lined with frayed velvet, were three things neatly arranged: a ring of small keys tied with a thin cord, a bundle of letters bound with a beige ribbon, all of them unopened, and a leather journal, dark cover worn at the corners, smelling faintly of mildew and lavender. I stood frozen for a long moment, my hand resting on the open lid, feelings tangled, confusion and a sudden flicker of anger. I couldn't pinpoint what made me angry. Maybe that Mary had hidden this from me, or that she carried these secrets into the grave without leaving me a word. We had lived together for more than 20 years. Not the dramatic kind of marriage. No endless fights or demands. We shared bank accounts, a car, and even our Netflix password. Yet here, in this little shed, was another world. A world where she had left behind things I had never seen. I stared at the keys. One looked like a mailbox key, another like for a safe deposit box, the rest ordinary, unmarked. I picked up the letters. Each envelope had a name written in Mary's slanted, tidy hand. The first said Emily K. Dawson, Kentucky, a name unfamiliar, no relative I'd ever heard of. The other letters bore no addresses, only words like mother, my beloved daughter, or simply, sorry. My chest tightened. I glanced at the leather journal. I didn't open it. Not yet. Something in me wasn't ready. It felt the same as touching Mary's urn for the first time after the funeral. Just resting a hand on the lid was enough to make it hard to breathe. I closed the box, brushed the dust from it, and carried it against my chest out of the shed. The sun was still bright, but the wind had turned colder. I felt like a thief rummaging through what didn't belong to me, even though the one who left it behind had been my wife. I didn't open the box again that day. I set it on the dining table in Mary's old place and sat across from it the whole afternoon. At one point, I made myself a cup of coffee, set it down, and just stared at the box as if it might speak on its own. I couldn't call anyone, not even my closest friend, not even the therapist who had helped me after Mary's death. This wasn't grief I wanted to share. This was something else, a fracture in trust, a shaking of the life I thought had been simple, untroubled. That evening, I moved the box into the bedroom, setting it on the wooden chair in the corner. I looked at it one last time before turning off the light, then lay in bed wide awake. I knew I would have to open it. I would have to read everything. I would have to know. Just not today. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying in bed, the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a cold glow on the metal box sitting quietly in the corner of the room, as if it were waiting for me, as if it knew I could never resist. By 5 in the morning, I got up, brewed a pot of coffee, and carried it upstairs. I sat down with the box. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the lid. This time, I pulled out the leather journal and gently turned the first page. The smell of old paper and lavender hit me, carrying me back to a time I had never been part of. The first line, written in blue ink, read, October 1989. The first night I realized I was a mother. I swallowed hard. Mary wrote about her 20s, an art student in Nashville, learning guitar, writing songs, and playing in a small band at local coffee shops. She loved a man whose name was never mentioned. He didn't stay, she wrote, but he left me with the one thing I never regretted. Emily, Emily. The name rang in my chest like a bell. Mary described life as a single mother in a cramped rental, working part-time at a bookstore. She didn't have much, but she had a child she loved with all her heart. I thought I could do everything, she wrote, until my mother was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, and I had to choose. The entries were scattered, months missing, then suddenly a long one. June 1995, I sent Emily to live with my mother. God forgive me, I wasn't strong enough to do both. I stopped reading. Pain pressed into my chest. In my memory, Mary had always been steady, gentle, unshaken, but here I saw her torn, trembling, breaking in ways I had never imagined. I turned more pages. In 1997, she met me. Not in the journal, but in a note tucked between two entries. That night, I sat beside the man who would become my husband at a technical seminar. He didn't talk much, but his eyes were warm like autumn. I remembered that first night. I still had the name tag from the event, pressed in my wallet as a private joke. But Mary never once told me about Emily. Not once. I found a letter beginning, "To my dearest Emily." The handwriting was stiff, as if written through tears. "My love, I am sorry I couldn't be the mother you needed. I know you never understood why I sent you away. You're grown now. Maybe you found your own answer. But I didn't send you away because I didn't love you. I sent you away because I was afraid. Afraid I'd hurt us both if I tried to keep you when I had nothing but confusion to give. Now I live in Ohio. I have a new life, a kind husband who loves me. I haven't told him about you, not because I am ashamed, but because I don't want anyone hurt. If one day you find this, know this. You were always the first light in my life. Love, Mom." I don't know how many times I have read it. My eyes blurred. I set the letter down, but my hand clung to the edge, as if letting go would make reality collapse. Mary had a daughter, and where was she now? How old was she? Did she know her mother had passed? Had she ever searched for Mary? I felt flayed alive, raw, aching, exhausted. Anger rose in me, sharper than anything I had ever felt toward Mary. How could she keep something this immense from me? How could she go 20 years without speaking in Emily's name? But beneath the anger, pity welled up. I remembered nights Mary sat alone in the shed, stitching endlessly beneath the yellow lamp. Once I asked, "What are you working on so hard?" She only smiled, "To keep my mind from wandering." Was that how she healed herself? Were the unsent letters, the quiet stitches, her way of holding Emily close without breaking the world we shared? I placed the journal back in the box, feeling as though I had walked through a long, dark hallway and come upon a new door, a door that opened to another Mary. Not the gentle wife by my side on Sunday mornings, but a mother who had once let go out of love and carried the silence of that choice her whole life. I knew this wouldn't stop here. I needed to know who Emily was. What kind of woman had she become? If she hated her mother, if she knew me. I no longer trusted what was real. But I knew one thing: I could never go back to pretending. I couldn't sit in this house, sip coffee, read the paper, and act like Mary hadn't lived another life before me. I had to find her. Emily. I spent 3 days deciding. 3 days since I placed the journal back in the box, since I read the first letter Mary wrote to Emily. I hadn't slept deeply, I ate without taste, and every time I stepped into the shed, it felt like walking past a small grave where Mary's spirit lingered, unwilling to leave. I knew what I had to do, not because I wanted revenge or to let my anger out, but because I could not keep living without knowing more of the truth. And part of that truth was alive somewhere in Kentucky, maybe just a few hours' drive away. I found the address in an unsent letter, written in Mary's steady hand, though the ink was blurred as if she had written it through tears. Emily K. Dawson, 1439, Miller Street, Lexington, KKY. I searched it on Google Maps. 3 hours and 20 minutes if there was no traffic. I closed the map. My eyes stayed fixed on the name, Emily. I packed lightly into an old canvas bag, grabbed a water bottle, a pack of almonds, and the jacket Mary had bought me last year for my birthday. On my way out to the truck, I glanced back at the shed once more. The door was still ajar, as if waiting for me to return. This time, I did not close it. I would come back. After I found the answer, the I-71 stretched out the same as always. Long and quiet, the hum of wind mixes with the tires against smooth asphalt. I had driven this highway many times, but this drive was different. No Mary in the passenger seat, no country songs she loved. Just me, my silver pickup, and a mind heavy with questions. I pulled into a rest stop in Jeffersonville, right next to a small diner with a faded sign, the same place Mary and I had eaten pancakes at 2 in the morning on our way back from a friend's wedding. She had ordered blueberry pie, and I had ordered black coffee. That was the night we told each other we didn't need children to feel complete. I let out a bitter laugh at the memory. She had a child. I just didn't know. I ordered a coffee to go. The waitress asked, "Are you driving long today, sir?" I nodded. "A trip to find a piece of the past," I answered, and immediately thought I sounded like a line from some cheap novel. But that was the truth. By the time I reached Lexington, it was past noon. The city, nestled between rolling green hills and rows of dark red brick houses, is the heart of the Midwest. It felt both strange and familiar, as if I had stepped into someone else's story. Miller Street was easy to find, a quiet neighborhood, maple trees lining both sides of the road, leaves just beginning to turn yellow. House number 1.39 was a single-story ranch style with white paint, a sloped roof, and wooden steps with neat flower pots lined along the porch. I parked in front, leaving the engine running. I sat there staring at the front door, asking myself what I was doing. What did I want here? An explanation. From someone who owed me nothing. Forgiveness. But who would forgive whom? A connection. Could I possibly connect with my wife's daughter, a woman who had never called me anything at all? I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. Then I shut off the engine, opened the door, and stepped out. Each footfall on the stone walkway echoed against my ribs like a heartbeat. I knocked. The sound was sharper than it should have been. The house felt quiet, almost asleep. Then I heard faint footsteps inside. The door opened, and there she was, a woman in her 30s with light brown curls tied high in a loose bun. She wore jeans, a wine-colored sweater, and was barefoot. Faint freckles touched her cheeks and her eyes. Gray eyes, exactly like Mary's. She narrowed her gaze at me. Not angry, not afraid, only surprised. You are, my throat went dry. My name is Tom Harrison. I was Mary's husband. Her face changed instantly. Shock, grief, or simply not knowing how to react, I could not tell. A moment passed, then another. Finally, she opened the door wider. Come in, she said softly. I think we should talk. Emily led me into a small living room, simple yet warm. On the walls hung a few black and white photographs, most of them landscapes. There were no personal photos. I noticed that. She pointed to the armchair by the window. Sit down. I'll make some tea. I nodded and quietly sat. My mind was still spinning. A minute later, Emily returned with 2 cups of tea. She placed one in front of me, then sat in the chair opposite. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Only the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain filled the silence. I know who you are, she said first. Her voice was calm, not cold, but not particularly warm either. I looked up at her. You do? Emily nodded. My mother, Mary, she used to mention you. Not much, but enough for me to know your name and to know you were the man she loved. I tightened my grip on the cup. The heat warmed my palm, but it could not soften the weight in my chest. Why did you never reach out to me? I asked in a low voice. Emily gave a faint, sad smile. Because she forbade it. Not with words, but with the way she avoided every time I brought you up. She leaned back, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling as if searching through old memories. When I was a child, I once asked, who are you living with? She said, a kind man. When I asked if I could meet him, she shook her head. Not necessary, sweetheart. Over time, I understood she wanted to keep that life separate. I felt something tighten around my ribs. I remembered those afternoons Mary sat in the shed, her gaze far away, as if her mind belonged elsewhere. And it had, with Emily. Were you angry? I asked hesitantly. Emily shook her head. I was angry once, but anger doesn't bring my mother back. And the older I grew, the more I understood the impossible place she was caught in. I looked at her and slowly nodded. I never knew about you. Not a word. I know, she said softly, and I don't blame you. I only regret that we never had the chance to talk sooner. We sat in silence for a long time. The tea cooled in our hands. I didn't come here to question, I said. I came to understand Mary and to understand myself. Emily smiled, this time more genuinely. Then what do you want to know? I drew a breath. Could you tell me what she was like when I wasn't with her? Emily nodded. She was a wonderful mother until she was forced to be a dutiful daughter. When she sent me to live with my grandmother, I didn't understand. But now I know she had no other choice. She had no money, my grandmother was growing weaker, and she didn't want to pull me into a life of chaos. She paused, her eyes fixed on the rug at her feet. But she always wrote letters, every month, never late. I still keep them all. Some were only a line. Are you well? I miss you. But to me, they meant everything. I swallowed hard. And when she married you, Emily went on, She told me, "This is the man I love. Let me live this life in peace." I respected that. Even though so many times I wanted to find you, I gave a small, sad laugh. Maybe I didn't deserve that kindness. No, Emily said firmly. She loved you. In her way. I looked at her. And you. She tilted her head. I loved her too. In another way. She was my mother. And you were the part of her life she chose to keep only for herself. We sat like that, facing each other. Two strangers bound by the heart of a woman who was gone. I told her about my Mary, about how she always saved the last cookie for me because she knew I would miss it, about how she never let me leave the house without fixing my collar, about the evenings she sat unpicking the wrong stitches in her embroidery without ever once complaining. Emily laughed through tears. That was my mother when she was young. She admitted when she was with you, she became the best version of herself. I froze. All these years I had lived beside a woman I thought I understood, but I had only ever known half of her. The other half was here, alive in the voice of her daughter, a young woman telling me who Mary was through the eyes of a child who never once called me father. But she didn't need to. I knew the bond was forming anyway, born out of loss, out of empathy, and out of truth. Mary had kept her secret not out of fear I would leave, but because she did not want me to bear the weight. She had loved both of us in different ways, but just as real. I rose, setting my cool teacup on the table. Emily stood too. I won't trouble you, I said. I am grateful you welcomed me. Emily looked at me, her eyes so much like Mary's it hurt. You're not troubling me. This door will always be open. I nodded, said nothing more, and turned to leave. Outside, the yellow leaves had begun to fall, and I knew a new chapter had opened. Not from discovering a secret, but from accepting it. And moving forward, I drove back to Ohio in almost complete silence. No radio, no music, only the sound of the wind rushing past the windows and the steady hum of the tires against the road. Along the highway, maple leaves had turned a deep red, swaying in the early autumn breeze, as if waving hello and farewell all at once. Part of me felt lighter. I had met Emily, and I had heard the truth. But another part still weighed heavily. I could not name the feeling. Not exactly pain, not exactly anger, just an emptiness stretching inside me, as if someone had pulled away the most important brick from the wall and the whole structure was waiting to collapse. That night I could not sleep. I lay restless, my eyes wide open in the dark. The clock on the nightstand ticked as if mocking me. Now you know. So what? I got up, pacing the house like a ghost, drifting quietly through memories. The living room still had the blanket Mary used to wrap around herself while watching TV. The armchair she always read in still showed the worn crease on the armrest from her fingers pressing there. In the kitchen, the jar of utensils still held the wooden spoon she loved to use for soup. Those little things now carried a different weight, not the weight of objects, but of memory. I opened her closet, sliding out the bottom drawer. Inside was a wooden box filled with her old embroidery. I once thought it was just a trivial hobby. Now I looked at it as a legacy. She had lived two lives, one with me, steady and peaceful, with fresh flowers on the table and Sunday dinners, and another life, as a mother, as a daughter who had made mistakes, who had let go out of love, and who had carried that cut within her for the rest of her days. I leaned against the door, looking around the room I once called home, and wondered. Maybe I was not the one betrayed, but the one protected. Mary had not told me about Emily, not out of deceit, but out of love. She did not want me to carry another burden. She did not want Emily drawn into something that might wound them both. She held it all inside, and to me, she remained the perfect wife. I began to see it not as secrecy, but as another way of loving. In the morning, I made coffee as I always did, but this time I did not just sit by the window staring blankly outside. I carried the cup to my study, switched it on the lamp, pulled out paper, and began to write. Emily, I don't know how to begin, but I suppose the best way is with the truth. Our meeting the other day was not only a turning point, it was the first time I felt I truly understood who Mary was. I once thought I knew her best. Now I realize she was deeper, more complex, and more beautiful than I ever imagined. I am not asking you to call me anything. I am not expecting anything. I only want to stay in touch as a man who once loved your mother with all his heart. If you allow it, I would like to become part of the family Mary left behind. There is no rush. I will wait. Tom. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope. I would mail it tomorrow. No email, no text. I wanted her to see my handwriting, real and honest, as true as my heart at this moment. By afternoon, when the sun leaned west behind the oak trees in the yard, I stepped outside. The shed still stood there, its paint faded, the roof streaked with moss, the wooden door creaking like a sigh. But it was no longer a place I planned to sell to erase the past. Now it was the last piece of Mary that still existed in the world. Not in photographs or closets, but in the living space she once created with her own hands. I opened the door. Inside, everything remained the same. The unfinished embroidery frame, the pots of soil, the bags of seeds, the gardening books. But something was different. I entered with a different heart. I no longer saw it as my wife's clutter. I saw it as the legacy of a woman who lived quietly, yet profoundly. I sat down on the small wooden chair by the window where Mary had spent so many hours. Through the glass, sunlight streamed through the leaves, pale and gentle, like a touch from the other side. I sat there, my hands resting on the table, doing nothing at all. Only present, in her space, among the things she had left behind. No anger, no bitterness, no pain, only forgiveness. And a gentle silence, wide enough and tender enough to hold all the words that were never spoken. 2 weeks after I sent the letter, Emily called. Her voice was soft, hesitant at first, but when she heard my simple, genuine hello, that hesitation seemed to fade. "Grandma and I will come visit," she said. "If you don't mind, I didn't mind." Truth was, I had hoped for it. I had cleaned the living room, straightened the paintings Mary once hung crooked with my clumsy hands that I never bothered to fix. I even baked banana bread from Mary's recipe notebook, something I never thought I would be able to do. That afternoon, a silver sedan pulled up in front of the house. Emily stepped out first, then circled around to open the door for an older woman with smooth white hair, tied in a bun. She wore a green cardigan and carried a gift basket. I walked out to the porch to greet them. Emily smiled. "I think Mom would have wanted us to come here." I didn't answer right away. I only nodded, then opened the door. "Please, come in." After a simple dinner of grilled meat and salad, we went out to the yard. I pointed toward the shed. "I'd like to see inside," Emily said. We stepped in. Her grandmother walked slowly, her hand resting gently on Emily's arm. The wooden door opened with a creak, letting out the scent of dry lavender and old wood. Emily looked around. Her eyes paused on the unfinished embroidery frame, then moved to the boxes of seeds. She didn't speak, but I saw her chest rise and fall, the quiet breathing of someone holding their emotions tight. "What can we do with this place?" she asked. I shrugged. I once thought of selling it, but now I want to keep it. And if you have any ideas, tell me. She glanced at me, then at the room again. "We could turn it into a memorial," she said. "Nothing big, no sign outside, just a place where people come to feel Mom." I nodded. "That's a good idea." And so the next morning, we began. I never thought I would hold a needle in my hand. But Emily said, "You should try, so you'll know why she loved it so much." So I tried. I began with clumsy stitches, uneven and rough. But little by little, my hands steadied, my eyes caught each thread more clearly. I even finished the embroidery Mary had left undone, a daisy flower. Emily's grandmother taught me how to grow plants from seeds. "Not like planting a tree from the store," she said. "Seeds need patience, like love." Together we painted the shed walls again, keeping the same pale green, but giving it a fresh coat. Emily built new shelves, hung up Mary's paintings that had never been displayed. One afternoon, children from the neighborhood gathered curiously by the fence. I invited them in. A little girl named Lily asked, "Do you teach painting?" I looked at Emily. She nodded. "My mom could teach, and you're still learning." So we began opening the shed every Saturday afternoon. Children came to draw and color, and adults came with their life stories. One evening, a widowed man came only to sit and look at a painting Mary had hung by the window. "Because it reminds me of my wife," he said. The shed, once only Mary's space, had now become part of the community. Every object inside had gained new meaning. The rocking chair was where Emily's grandmother told stories about the war. The bookshelf held a boy named Nathan's first sketchbook. And the wooden table where Mary once sat had become a tea table where people rested their hands and told each other what they could not say at home. I felt Mary there, not in a photograph, but in the connections between people. She had loved community, loved small things, loved every breath of life. And now I was continuing what she had left unfinished. One evening when the sun leaned across the shed roof, casting long shadows over the grass, Emily sat beside me on the porch steps. We watched the children play in the garden, their laughter mixing with the bird song of the fading day. You know, she said, her eyes fixed on the light, Mom always thought she left nothing behind. I turned to her. But you proved her wrong, Emily said. You turned memories into something alive, into something useful. I didn't know what to say. I only clenched my hand lightly, trying to steady myself. Mom would be so proud of you, she whispered. Truly. I nodded, my lips trembling. Not from sadness, but because something inside had finally healed. Mary was no longer present the way she once was, but in this life, in the plants, in the laughter of children, in the hands of the elderly brushing wood, she was still here. And I, the husband who never fully knew her, was now loving her in a new way, through what remained of her love. Last week, I got a call from Leslie, the real estate agent who once suggested selling the shed. Tom, there are still people asking about that old shed, she said over the phone. A coffee shop owner wants to buy it for an art studio. Good price. I looked out the window at the morning light spilling through the half-open wooden door of the shed, at the children coloring on the long table I had built from reclaimed wood. I heard laughter from inside, the soft sigh of Emily's grandmother sipping tea. Thank you, Leslie, I answered gently. But I'm not selling anymore. It's not a shed now, it's part of Mary. She hesitated. I understand, I really do. I hung up, feeling a peace I hadn't known since Mary passed away. In the months that followed, my life didn't return to what it had been. It became something else. No longer quiet and monotonous, but full of sound, movement, and connection. I began teaching basic skills to local teenagers, how to solder wires safely, repair old fans, and install LED lights. Little things I once thought no one cared about had now become bridges between generations. Emily helped me start a small fund, Mary's Shed Fund, to buy art supplies, seeds, and small sewing machines. The kids loved sewing more than I expected. One boy said, I want to sew a shirt for my cat. And so the whole class sewed shirts for cats, me included. I joined a volunteer group that cleaned community gardens. Every time I turned the soil and planted, I thought of Mary. She used to say, planting is the most optimistic act. You may never see the tree fully grow, but you plant it anyway. Now I understand her better than ever. One afternoon in March, when the snow had melted and the sun was soft again, I went into the shed to tidy the bookshelf. As I pulled open an old drawer, I found a small, pale yellow envelope wedged behind the wooden panel. On the back was handwriting I knew by heart. Tom, if you've found this, it means I'm gone. I sat in the rocking chair, opening the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a folded sheet, Mary's handwriting stretched across in blue ink. My dear Tom, if you are reading this, I am no longer by your side. I don't know how you found it, maybe by chance, maybe because I left too many traces. I'm sorry I never told you about Emily, not because I didn't trust you, but because I knew you would be hurt thinking I didn't trust you. I lived two lives, Tom, and the life with you was the one I loved most, where I was safe, loved unconditionally, where I could be the wife I always dreamed of being. I hid my past not from shame, but to protect what we had. But if you find Emily, if she comes to you, please open your heart. She is the part of me I never dared ask you to share. And if you are reading this, please do one last thing for me. Live on, truly. Not just breathing, not just existing, but living with all the heart I know you have. I love you. Always. Mary. I pressed the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. I didn't cry, I didn't hurt. I only felt something whole, as if the final piece had been placed exactly where it belonged. Mary had seen it all before. She knew I would need this, a last whisper to release the weight and begin again. That afternoon, I sat in front of the shed, on the small wooden step, tea in hand, Mary's letter on my lap. A light breeze carried the scent of lavender from the porch. I looked out at the garden, once Mary's work, now the work of an entire community. Emily sat with the children, guiding their brushes across a large painting. Her grandmother knitted in a chair. A boy read a joke out loud. I touched the letter and whispered, "You were right, Mary. I wasn't just living on. I was living fully, with the part of you that remained, with the things you loved, and with a heart no longer running from the truth." The last light of the day poured through the shed window, across the unfinished painting hanging in the corner. The shadows of me, Emily, and the children stretched across the wooden floor, long, gentle, warm. A new beginning doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be bright enough to see that we are still capable of love. And I, the one who remained, had learned how to love again because of a brave woman who once loved me in her own way. If you've come this far, if you've read my story, Mary's story, Emily's story, and the story of that old shed, then I only want to say something simple. Thank you. I'm not a writer. I used to be an engineer, a man who liked things clear, with formulas, inputs, and outputs. But the years after Mary's death taught me something I never thought I'd learn. Some things in life cannot be calculated, like love, lust, and the ability to keep living. When I started telling the story, I didn't think anyone would care about an old widower living in the suburbs of Ohio, with a shed out back and a heart still stitched together. But now, as I write these final lines, I know one thing for certain. Pain does not isolate us. It connects us. I've met remarkable people through this story. The children are painting inside Mary's shed. The neighbors who, for the first time, shared their own grief. And even strangers who sent emails saying, "Tom, your story made me think of my mother," or "I lost my wife last year, and your shed gave me hope." That is why I keep writing, keep telling. Not because I want to talk about Mary forever, but because I believe everyone has a shed in their life. Maybe it's a dusty room, an old mailbox, a memory you've never dared to open. Maybe it's a person, or an opportunity, or a truth you've been avoiding. I tell this story because I believe this. No one is ever too old to begin again. No loss can take away your ability to love forever. And sometimes what we thought was an ending turns out to be a beginning we weren't ready to embrace. If this story reached you, if at any moment while reading you found yourself nodding and thinking, "I've been there," if you paused for a few seconds to remember someone you love, or if you simply smiled because a small part of it reminded you of something familiar, then I ask you, please subscribe to this channel or follow if you're reading this on a blog or social media. Not because I want fame, I've lived past that age, but because I want to keep telling stories and I want to hear yours. Maybe next time I'll tell you about Paul, the gardener who reconciled with his son after 14 years because he learned how to nurture plants in Mary's shed, or about Lily, the little girl once afraid of the dark who now teaches other children to paint stars. Or maybe I'll tell your story if you let me. What can you do next? Subscribe or follow this channel so I have a reason to keep writing, to keep living fully the way Mary hoped I would. Comment below. Tell me where you're reading from. Tell me what your shed is. Who is the Mary in your life? I read every comment. I truly do. Share this story if you know someone who might need it. Someone who is hurting. Someone is trying to find themselves again. Someone is learning how to live on. I am not perfect, and I don't expect you to be. For half my life, I stayed quiet, believing all I needed was enough, just to be safe. But now I know to live fully means to face even the parts of ourselves we fear most. And if someone out there is struggling with loss, with silence, with words they can't bring themselves to say, I want you to know one thing. You are not alone. I'll see you in the next story. My name is Tom. I was once the only one who remained. Now I am the one who began again. I'll see you again in the next afternoon light through the small window of a shed.